In 2018, Penguin released a collection of 50 classic books by 50 classic authors. We're going to be going over them in the next few weeks and delving into the issues behind what the writers were writing about. Follow us. Allen Ginsberg. Television was a baby crawling toward that death chamber. I have to say this was my favorite, or one of my favorite reads from the whole series. And even the name sounds interesting. What's he saying about television? Is he talking about modern times, that television's dying? But television isn't dying. Have you seen Game of Thrones? So really interesting stuff for me, actually. And I think what is going on here in this piece is Ginsberg is talking about lots of things. He's talking about capitalism. He's talking about sexuality and homosexuality. He's talking about the environment. He's talking about the Stop the War movement. There's lots of stuff going on here. He's talking
reflective of the times.
Yeah, he's talking about mysticism and everything. So how did you feel generally about Ginsberg and this piece?
Yeah, I felt like there was a certain flow that today is often seen as being stereotypical, but you know you've made it when you're the stereotype. Like you created this kind of very beat.
Right.
And
That's
yeah.
It reminded me of Amir Baraka, who passed away, and Saul Williams' kind of long form style.
Yeah,
even some
exactly.
of my writings, in the way that I've done them, because it's kind of just long form and with lots of references. So you kind of start with a stack of paper, and then you write, you get an idea, and you start writing, and you keep going until the idea has subsided, right, or the feeling has subsided. So sometimes it can be a bit erratic because it just keeps going, and other times it's more short form. But it's this kind of idea that it's free, you know, and you know, Ginsberg, lots of drug taking, and kind of lots of recreational uses. One thing I found interesting was the difference between how the 60s are presented in other times. So in the television show called Mad Men, which is a snapshot of life into the 1960s, which is actually a really good snapshot, what you have is they presented their lives a bit differently. So that side of things is more about Madison Avenue advertising executives driving to work in their Chevrolets to go and vote for Richard Nixon, right? But Ginsberg's side, I mean, it's still New York, but he's talking about a whole different, he's kind of drugged up, smoked up apartments on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, going to Woodstock to listen to Creedence Clearwater Revival or John Lennon, you know. Like, there's a really interesting snapshot of life that you get from Ginsberg that sometimes maybe you don't get from kind of the presentation of the 60s and other places. For
sure. Which makes you think, you know, how is today going to be represented?
Okay.
Well, like, you know, big business, and then you have climate change, like Extinction Rebellion or whatnot.
Okay.
The two kind of polar opposites in mentality and mind. And that's, I guess, when these things are created, right? It's like this was kind of a new era, and there was a lot of mysticism.
A lot.
Particularly talking about kind of Eastern philosophy moving through and kind of weaving, and which generates huge capacity for ideas. You know, particularly when it hit America, for example, like this kind of hippie movement.
Exactly.
Kind of explosion of color and different new avenues of thinking, essentially.
The fifth dimension, you know, making music, that kind of
free flow, you know, and seeing things in a different way. So one of the things that my favorite poem here, which was actually quite short, was about the telephone. You know, the ringing of the telephone. Life happens and then there's a telephone. Life happens and then there's a telephone ringing, you know. And most people see it as this kind of everyday tool that you use, whereas you don't see its effect upon you. You only see its use value.
Okay.
But the kind of and that, I guess, is you know, seeing things in a new way. You know, how is it affecting me? You know, which I thought.
Okay. Money chant of soapers, toothpaste apes in television sets, deodorizers on hypnotic chairs, petroleum mongers in Texas, jet plane streaks among the clouds, skywriters' lies in the face of divinity, fanged butchers of hats and shoes, all owners, with an obsession on property and vanishing selfhood, and their long editorials in the face of the screaming Negro, attacked by ants crawled out of the front page. Machinery of a mass electrical dream, a war-creating whore of Babylon bellowing over capitals and academies. Money, 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 shrieking mad celestial money of illusion. Money made of nothing, starvation, suicide, money of failure, money of death. Money against eternity, and eternity's strong mills grind out the vast paper of illusion. Ginsberg and his friends are kind of known as the Beat Generation, and it wasn't a whole generation, it was just a few of them, but they embodied this poetic literary movement that came along with the hippie movement, with this idea of the counterculture. So 2 questions. First of all, how do you feel about this idea of the counterculture in poetry as a use for that? And secondly, this thing about drug taking. So these guys, I mean, this William S. Burroughs, Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. And Kerouac's actually written a couple of books about Buddhism, so you can see how it all links in, and they're all close friends. But William S. Burroughs, he killed his wife. There's a in a game of William Tell, which is the one where you put the apple on their head and try and shoot the apple off someone's head, and he's killed his wife in this way because they're all taking drugs. You know, they're forging prescriptions. They're trying to meet with marijuana dealers from South America. Like, the drug taking is really virulent for these guys. So second question: how do you feel about the drugs? Can you get this kind of content, this kind of poetry without the drugs? Do we get these ideas without the drugs, or do we need the drug taking to be a part of these movements?
I'm not sure. I think it depends on the individual artist. You know, there are some artists that are squeaky clean and they can produce amazing stuff. However, I will say, and don't take this as kind of, I'll probably change my mind tomorrow, but if you look at a lot of artists, take Eminem for example, or people who started taking drugs and then they kind of go clean, you often find that there's points that the drug is kind of influencing.
Okay, yeah, definitely, yeah. And
in that time, we have to remember, you know, this was a time where there was mass propaganda on how to be a certain way. Missionary sex, lights off, suit and tie, wife at home, kids, backyard, barbecue on a Saturday, life is good. This is existence in a box, and, you know, of course a very small number of people actually live this life.
Very few could live that.
And this was a kind of breaking away from that. And so when, you know, culture is never a set thing, and when we talk about kind of this kind of counterculture, it's counter that image of being, this is success. So
drugs is a way to
break that through, or see alternative realities. The other side of it, so addiction, for example, is a completely different. It's a personal thing that the individual may struggle with, you know. But in terms of drugs changing perspectives, of course, you know, it's making neural connections that have never been made. You know? It's, in kind of Rumi-esque terms, it's touching a different part of the elephant, you know. That you always thought it was this reality, you know.
So Gary Snyder was an older poet who kind of knew some of these guys, and he makes the point that he liked what they were doing, but there were casualties. People died because of this drug taking, right? They were at one point, right? Exactly. They were literally encouraging people to do acid, right? It was like drugs was definitely a part of it. And I remember Jean Vollmer, who was the wife of William S. Burroughs, was seen as the intellectual center of the group, you know. So I think what I'm trying to say is that they had the knowledge. I mean, it's not as if they weren't reading. You still get these intellectual ideas that Ginsberg is promoting without the drug taking, but maybe you don't get them in such a compelling way, because at times he's talking about, he's talking about his lover, he's talking about ejaculating, he's talking about being brought to mysticism, to spirituality, right? And I think that's something that maybe that was lacking from the work of Camus, right? Because
the erotic
the erotic stuff is the real, and that's gonna try and take him somewhere else. How do you feel about that?
I think as someone who was gay, to speak that openly and this in such kind of tender terms, because when a lot of people think about, like, in those days in particular, the stereotype was this kind of this joke almost, whereas Ginsberg brings together this touching. There's so much tenderness there, and to be brave enough to actually say, your image is completely wrong. The reality that you're projecting is of your own filth in your own head. It's nothing to do with the lived experiences, And again, as I say, to be able to break away from that, and of course to deal with the pain of being portrayed that way, it's a very complex kind of.
Interesting.
We always say, it's particularly, rock stars and idols and drugs. The kind of interplay between those two. It's a bit of a messy zone.
Okay. So we're saying that Ginsberg takes these things like climaxing with your partner and turns it into this transcendent experience, right?
And it's very cool to read.
It's so cool.
Like, you know what I'm saying? You don't stop, your eyes just kind of roll through, and it's very, very well written.
Yeah. I mean, wow. I mean, especially maybe as an openly gay person, he would have been one of the first few to be kind of a public figure, in that sense. I'm thinking of maybe James Baldwin, and Audre Lorde and others. We're talking about the first kind of people to, in modern society to have that genius, and to openly express their sexualities in that way as well. So in terms, I think we can relate things back to Camus. Creating dangerously. Right. So this is the thing.
Dangerous for who?
Dangerous for who, right? And some of in terms of their drug taking, some of them were nearly sent to prison, almost, So they're challenging, in some sense, the orthodoxies of power in the 60s. And, unfortunately, they got Nixon, but that's another story. But how dangerous would it have been for these guys to espouse these kinds of ideas, not in a mortal sense, but in an ideological sense? Power wasn't necessarily with them, right? Although the Stop the War movement the hippie movement merged into the Stop the War movement, and they had an impact on Vietnam, right? And we all accepted that was a bad episode when it happened.
Sure. Well, think about the Iraq War, right?
Yeah.
There was protest before the war even happened.
Okay, but that's the thing with the Iraq War. I don't think we in this country had the intellectual power to challenge it in the same way, right? It was Blair says Bush is going, so we have to go too. We're going, right? But where were the Ginsbergs? Where were the William S. Burroughs? Where were the Gene Volumers? Where were the Jack Kerouacs? Where were they?
Maybe we were too young to be hip to it at the time, But I get your point.
Okay, cool. So anyway, thank you very much for reading. Please give us your rating out of 10 for Ginsberg.
Yeah, solid 8 for
solid
Mr.
8.
Allen.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.